Today on CityCast DC, big news dropped on Friday morning. The DC Board of Elections announced that Initiative 83 has enough signatures to be on the ballot this November. That means ranked choice voting at open primaries could be on the horizon for DC, and they would seriously shake up DC politics. City Paper's Alex Koma is here to explain what the future of our elections could look like. Today's Tuesday, August 6th. I'm Bridget Todd, and here's what DC is talking about. So, Alex, I-83 is proved to be on the ballot this November. We actually had you on to talk about this about a year ago when this initiative was initially just being floated. So it's been kind of a long, bumpy road. What exactly is the latest? What has happened now to make this official?
Yeah, it's a long, bumpy road that has many twists and turns, I suspect, between now and November 5th. But what we do know is that the Initiative 83 is at this point looking pretty likely, like it's going to head to voters in November. The most important thing that just happened is that the DC Board of Elections took a look at all of the petition signatures that organizers were responsible for gathering. They needed to hit specific targets, getting 5% of all registered voters in the city, as well as 5% in 5 of the city's 8 wards. Those are hard things to do. It's a challenge to not only organize and canvass, and get people to agree to sign a petition to get this on the ballot. But then you've got to do, small things like, do you have the right address on the form? Did the signature read clearly? And so a lot of ballot initiative pushes fail at that stage. So it is no small thing that Initiative 83 has succeeded. The Board of Elections basically saying they have more than enough signatures to put this on the ballot. In fact, thousands more than they needed to get this on the ballot. So it's not a guarantee that you'll get to vote on it in November, but it is looking increasingly likely.
Well, so for folks who might not know, what exactly is ranked choice voting and how would it work in DC?
Yeah, well, it would only apply for local elections, of course. That's all DC, has jurisdiction over. But the most important thing to know is that it would give, all voters a chance to, rather than just, you're looking at a big field of 10 candidates, you just got to pick 1 or 2, depending on the race. It would give you the chance to rank your preferences. The exact mechanisms would still need to be worked out and sort of codified if this initiative passes. But basically, the way ranked choice voting works is you get a chance to say maybe your top 4 choices. And so that's sort of ensuring that a candidate isn't winning with a very narrow majority in a crowded race. It's ensuring that a candidate has to get up to that 50% where they're, allocating and seeing, okay, this candidate doesn't have enough support to advance. We'll see who their voters ranked second and then reallocate that support until you get to a point where you have someone who has accrued a majority between the first place votes they've received, second place, on down the line. The idea being it's not just people choosing, the least bad option or only the option they think they can win. It's giving them a little bit more of a voice and theoretically incentivizing candidates to campaign to everybody, not just the people who might be viewed as their most core supporters, and campaign positively so that everybody thinks about them favorably, even if they're not ranking them number 1 necessarily.
That's so interesting. And I'm curious, in terms of how this might impact the psychology of people who are voting, how do you see a ranked choice voting system changing voting behavior?
Yeah, well, number 1, you've got to explain all this to people who are, not necessarily familiar with the idea. Ranked choice voting or preference voting does get used in all kinds of stuff around DC, whether it's schools or public housing, but it would fundamentally change how elections work because, as we've seen in neighboring localities like Arlington, that have experimented with ranked choice, especially if you're a longtime politician, turning out the same base of voters that come out for you every year, because now you need to be reaching out to opponents to convince them to not rank you last. That is a very different style of campaigning than what we've seen in, for instance, big council races, especially for the at-large seats where everybody around the city can run, where it's essentially just entrenched incumbents knowing that the opposition will be divided. Theoretically, this is going to put an end to that style of campaigning for, say, the Anita Bonds of the world who regularly win with 30% of the vote.
So I know there's been a ton of feedback on this initiative. Break it down for me. Like, who is for it and who is against it and why?
Yeah, well, because the other half of the initiative that we haven't talked about is opening party primaries to independent voters, that even more so than ranked choice voting has really created an interesting divide in the city over this. Now, the Democratic Party, which is, of course, dominant in D.C. and really controls a lot of levers of power here, they have concerns about ranked choice voting because of its potential to disrupt exactly what we were talking about, the ability for incumbents to win easily and not have to worry about their reelection. But even more than that, even people who might support ranked choice voting are, asking questions, do we want people registered as independents being able to vote in the Democratic primary, for instance? Because it fundamentally alters, the party primary structure, the people who are most involved in the Democratic Party, most involved in DC's, sort of electoral structure, are the ones who have the most questions about this initiative. For the people who are registered as independents and have sort of been locked out of participating in Democratic primaries, you can always just change your registration, but some people don't want to. They don't want to register as Democrats. They are the people who are really interested in this, people who are coming a bit more of this from outside of the establishment, broadly on the progressive left. But because, this smushes together these two issues, you're seeing support and opposition come in unexpected places.
So why have these two issues, open primaries and ranked choice voting, been lumped together into one initiative?
The way they'll spin it is that it is, we view these as broadly democratic reforms and we want to, get it all done at once. I think that they see it as a way to win over support from people who are, maybe ranked choice voting feels a little esoteric, but if you can't vote in the Democratic primary, you sure understand the nuts and bolts of that. It feels like an attempt to me to try and broaden the tent of potential supporters. And I mean, look, it seems to have worked. I mean, they say they collected 40,000 signatures. That would be the most for any ballot initiative in DC history, as near as I can tell. And so, they're counting on that translating into broad support should this be on the ballot in November.
So I understand that Councilmember Christina Henderson actually tried in 2021 to pass this as an actual law, but it kind of went nowhere. Why do you think it failed?
Yeah, she was trying to pass the ranked choice voting component in particular. You'll recall when she won in one of those huge at-large races, and she basically said, I don't want anybody else to win the way that I did, which with, 17% of the vote or whatever it was. And, it's been held up because while some people on the council support ranked choice voting, it had to move through committees controlled by people who don't. The influence of Anita Bonds, Phil Mendelson, the council chair, is really significant here in ensuring that the council sort of just gave up on trying to pass this as legislation. And it is what spurred organizers to just try and put this directly on the ballot instead.
Summer's not over yet. Metropolitan Washington Restaurant Week brings the eats from August 12th through the 18th at hundreds of locations across the DMV, offering amazing 3-course menus for lunch and dinner and brunch. It's a great time to dine out at a favorite eatery or indulge your culinary curiosity and try something new. There's an awesome variety of cuisines to explore and menu options to fit all palates. Many locations are also offering cocktail and wine pairings to further elevate your dining experience. And as a special treat for the summer promotion, you can feed your adventurous side with delicious American lamb dishes at select locations. Just look for the patriotic lamb on listings at rwdmv.com, where you can find the full list of participating restaurants, view menus, and book your reservations. Metropolitan Washington Restaurant Week is presented by RAMW and Events DC. So why do we think that the current process of putting it on the ballot has been more successful? Do you think that it has something to do with maybe council being seen as kind of out of touch with the desires of voters?
Adam Eidinger and many of the other organizers working on this ballot initiative, they know what it takes to get something on the ballot. I mean, if you have enjoyed DC's decriminalized marijuana market, for instance, you can thank them. It's many
I sure have.
Yeah, it's many of the same people who successfully engineered that ballot initiative. And yes, I think there's absolutely something to be said for pointing at the council, saying they're not doing this. If you want this, that your politicians aren't listening to you. You can call them and email them as much as you want. They haven't taken action on this. So you just sign a piece of paper and get to vote on it yourself. They used many of the same arguments, because again, it's many of the same people, when they were passing Initiative 82, which was repassing the elimination of the tip minimum wage. Because as you recall, Initiative 77, to get rid of it the first time around, passes by a wide margin. The council steps in and reverses it. And so organizers came back and they said, how do you like that the council did the opposite of what you told them to do? I think it's a powerful argument, but even more than that, I think the opponents of this have to make complex arguments about why ranked choice voting would be confusing or why it would disenfranchise people. The people who are supporting this just say, this is good for democracy. You want something that's good for democracy, don't you? It's just an easier argument to make, I think.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious, if this initiative does pass in November, how do you see this changing DC politics long term?
Well, if it does pass in November, it's going to kickstart a firestorm, because that essentially starts a less than 2-year clock to try and get this ready for the 2026 elections, which is what they've been, sort of promising when this would take effect. So the first thing that would need to happen is, this is an advisory ballot, initiative. It can't allocate money to actually make these changes go into effect, nor can it, design the program with how it would work. In fact, that's been a huge part of the controversy of this initiative, is that the DC Council feels like they're getting their authority stepped on to make these changes. So essentially what organizers are counting on is that this passes by such a wide margin, that it sends such a clear message that if the council doesn't then move to actually set this up, that they'll know that people will be mad and will be, willing to vote against them, for it. So if this passes, that's going to set off a scramble, because the Board of Elections will have to figure out how to run this program. The council will have to figure out how to fund it and design it. And that will get messy, because while several council members have indicated their support for this initiative, several others really don't want it to happen. So, it may well change politics in quite a few ways, especially because we've got a mayoral election coming up in 2026, council chair, attorney general, these big citywide races. But first, they've got to get through the really messy process of actually putting it into practice.
So if it doesn't make it onto the ballot in November, how does that work?
Yeah, well, the reason why I've been couching all of this in the if it makes it is because, the courts could always step in here. There is an active lawsuit right now filed by the head of the DC Democratic Party seeking to block this. It got thrown out in its first attempts here over some filing mistakes. Essentially, they jumped the gun and filed the case a little too early. It's now at the Court of Appeals, which should be deciding on this. I mean, heck, within the next few weeks, that's what they're hoping, because they really need to know whether the court's going to step in or not. It's always possible that the opponents of the initiative could file another legal case. In fact, you heard the Board of Elections chair sort of warning them, urging them, please don't sue us, as they were voting to put this on the ballot the other day. So, it's very possible. The courts have had a lot to say about ballot initiatives in the past. There have been attempts to derail Initiative 77 and Initiative 82, the tip minimum wage initiatives. So it wouldn't surprise me. But, if the courts do step in, man, you've got to imagine there's going to be a lot of angry people, 40,000 people who signed this petition, who thought this would be on the ballot, and got to imagine that, knowing that they'd need to wait another 2 years and have to do all this over again, that would not sit well.
Well, you said it wouldn't surprise you, and I guess, give it to me straight. How likely do you think it is that this will pass in November?
The broad assumption I've heard from everyone I've spoken to about this, whether they're for it or against it, as begrudgingly as they might admit it, is they think if this makes it on the ballot, it will pass. Again, it comes down to what I was saying earlier. It's going to look complicated when it's on the ballot. It's going to be a long ballot. It's going to be a presidential year. A lot of people may not even be tuned into this. It's a, confusing, hyper-local issue. So in instances like that, I tend to think that the people with the simplest possible argument to make, and let's be clear, who are extremely well funded. I mean, I'm just looking at their, campaign finance reports. They are blowing the opponents out of the water in terms of the amount of money they're going to have to communicate to voters, to support this ballot initiative, telling people, hey, support democracy. It's just a much easier argument. I think their signs say hold politicians accountable. Like, come on, that's bread and butter right there. So
good messaging.
Yeah, you never know. I mean, I wouldn't discount the fact that, as I said, the mayor's against it, the council chair's against it, the Democratic Party's against it. They will be telling many of, the voters heading out, that they're speaking to who will be voting in, local DC races, hey, don't support this. And I don't discount that. That could be effective. But, when it comes to just ordinary people who aren't in touch with, what the mayor thinks about something, I suspect it will be a pretty powerful argument to make. I mean, we've got some polling on it. It says that things like ranked choice voting and open primaries are really popular. If they can make this case effectively, and I think they probably can, it would not surprise me one bit to see this pass by like a very wide margin.
You talked about how this is kind of a hyper-local issue. People might not even have it on their radar, but how might it impact things like DC's mayoral election?
If it all gets implemented, and as I said, lots and lots of ifs, that this would have a huge impact on the race for mayor as it is shaping up. I mean, right now we are all sort of wondering whether Mayor Muriel Bowser is going to run again. And, if she does, she's probably counting on being able to win the way that she won last time, which is two opponents splitting the vote. And there are lots of council members who are eager to run for mayor. She's been a 3-term mayor, and that has sort of, got a lot of pent up energy, people who want to run citywide. It completely reshapes that conversation if ranked choice voting is part of the conversation. You could easily see a world in which the mayor says, listen, I've done this for 3 terms. I might lose a 4th if I can't count on vote splitting. Maybe I sit this one out. The what ifs, the possibilities are huge. I don't take it for granted at all that they get their act together and get this, rolling for 2026 if it passes. But for us political junkies, it's catnip because it would completely reorder some of the biggest races in local politics.
Alex, I can't wait to have you back in November when we know what's going on with this. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's always a pleasure.
That's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not share it with your favorite voter? You can rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with even more news from around the city. Talk to you then.